My house is a small mausoleum of silences. Every object, from the worn velvet sofa to the yellowed portrait on the wall, holds the echo of a life I have strived to forget. The walls, which I whitewash every 2 years, cannot hide the fissures of time, just as my face cannot hide the marks of my 72 springs of solitude. I live on the minimum, a salary that barely pays for medicine and food, but organization and cleanliness are my only form of control, an armor against the chaos that once devastated everything. The afternoon sun streams through the living room window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air, like little ghosts of moments that never existed. It is a false peace, the calm that precedes the memory of the storm, and I have become an expert at navigating these still waters, avoiding any wave that threatens to sink my fragile boat. That night, the storm was not just a memory. The rain beat furiously against the window pane, and the thunder seemed to want to crack the sky and the earth. I was finishing my thin soup when I heard a sound that did not belong to the symphony of the storm, a contained, almost inaudible cry coming from my porch. My first instinct was the usual one, to ignore it. The world outside was a monster, and I had locked my door to it 5 decades ago. But the sound persisted, a thin, desperate lament. With my body creaking in protest, I got up and peeked through the slit in the curtain. Huddled near the door, trying to shield herself from the wind, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 16. Her clothes, soaked and too big, made her body seem even more fragile, and she clung to an old backpack as if it were the only solid thing in her universe. I opened the door just a crack, enough for the cold wind to invade the room. My voice came out rougher than I intended, rusted from disuse. "What do you want here? Go away." The words came out before I could contain them, the old defense that had kept me safe for so long. But the girl's reaction paralyzed me. Upon hearing my harsh tone, she did not raise her face to argue. Instead, she shrank even more, her whole body trembling in an instinctive gesture of someone expecting a blow. Her large, frightened eyes met mine for a second, and she whispered, her voice choked with cold and fear, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you." In that instant, time fractured. I no longer saw a stranger at my door. I saw myself, at 8 years old, huddled in the corner of the kitchen as my father raised his hand. The castle of apathy I had built over 60 years crumbled in a single second. That girl's pain was a mirror of my own, a wound I had only covered but never healed. For the first time in longer than I can remember, the urge to protect someone was stronger than the need to protect myself. My trembling hand pushed the door, opening it completely. The creak of the hinges sounded like a cry of liberation. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside, a silent invitation for her to enter my sanctuary of silences. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of a trap, but all she found was the reflection of her own helplessness. Slowly, she stood up and came inside, bringing with her the smell of the rain and the weight of a world I knew all too well. If this story has already touched your heart, know that it is just beginning. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unfolding of Elsa and Anna's journey, and comment here from which city you are watching us. We want to know how far our story has reached. I am writing Block 2, Act 2, Context and Development. The first few hours were of a tense quietness. I handed her a dry towel and one of my old nightgowns, which was huge on her thin body. While she changed in the small bathroom, I prepared what was left of my soup, adding a little more water to make it last. We ate in silence at the kitchen table. I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She ate with a desperate urgency, yet at the same time with fear, as if at any moment I could snatch the plate from her hands. Her eyes didn't meet mine for long, always dropping back to her plate. I didn't ask questions. That night, words were unnecessary. The sound of the rain outside and the noise of her spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl were the only communication we needed. I took her to the guest room, which was really just a storage room for junk and memories, and made the bed. She fell asleep instantly. The next morning, the house felt different. Her presence, even asleep, filled the void in a way that frightened and, paradoxically, comforted me. When Anna woke up, the sun was already high. Her eyes, free from the terror of the previous night, examined every detail of the room with a childlike curiosity. She moved through the house with the delicacy of a wild animal trying to understand a new territory, touching the surface of the furniture with her fingertips. I offered her bread and coffee, and again she ate with the same restrained voracity. I watched her hands, small and with bitten nails, the way her body always remained slightly hunched, ready to protect itself. In her posture, in her silence, I saw the long and painful history of someone who learned that being invisible is the best survival strategy. It was a language I spoke fluently. It was in the backyard that our first bridge was built. I had a pot with an almost dead rose bush, a dry and lifeless branch that I didn't have the heart to throw away. Anna approached it, observing it with an attention I hadn't seen in years. With surprising care, she removed some dry leaves and touched the soil with her fingers. "I think it just needs a little sun and water," she said, her voice sounding for the first time without the tremor of fear. I looked at that dry branch and then at the girl beside me, and the words came out of my mouth before I could think. Sometimes, all we need is a little care to come back to. Life. At that moment, I knew I wasn't talking about the plant. The decision was made. She would stay. Saving that girl was a desperate attempt to water my own dry root. With the decision came the ghosts. The nights became my private purgatory. Anna's presence, so vulnerable sleeping in the next room, unlocked doors in my mind that I had sealed with cement and pain. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the scream stuck in my throat, with fragmented images of my father, the glint of his belt buckle, the smell of alcohol on his breath, his deep voice echoing through the house. The fear I felt for Anna, the fear that the world would hurt her, mingled with my own ancient terror. I felt like a fraud. How could I protect that girl if I could never protect myself? The responsibility weighed on my shoulders like a shroud, and the fear of failing her was a poison that consumed me slowly. It was then that the worst of my memories surfaced, one I had never dared to revisit. Looking at Anna, so young, and with a whole life ahead of her, I was transported back to my own 17 years. The shame of pregnancy, the result of the violence I suffered at home, flooded me as if it were yesterday. I remembered hiding my growing belly under loose clothes, the isolation, the whispers of the neighborhood. The birth of my son was not a joy. It was the materialization of my pain and humiliation. I loved him, or tried to love him, with what was left of me, but it was a love that was born wounded, stained by the origin of his conception. He was a piece of the man who destroyed me, and looking at him was a constant reminder of my deepest trauma. My son grew up an angry boy. He carried in his eyes the same fury I saw in my father's eyes. I tried, with all my might, to break the cycle. I filled him with a silent, desperate love, but the seed of violence had already been planted. He became a bitter young man, resentful of poverty, of the silent and sad mother I was. One day, during a fight over money, he raised his hand to me. In that gesture, I saw my father reborn. It was the last straw. With a bleeding heart, I sent him away. "In this house, violence no longer takes root," I said, with a strength I didn't know I possessed. He left, and with him, he took the last spark of my hope. I closed the door, and from that day on, decided that my heart was closed to the world. Slowly, Anna began to trust me. During our silent routines, she would release fragments of her story. She told me about her mother's indifference, who never looked her in the eye. She spoke of her stepfather, a man who called her useless and a nuisance, who complained about the money spent on her food and school supplies. The violence she suffered left no marks on her body, but on her soul. It was a slow, daily abuse that convinced her she had no value. "He used to say I was lucky to have a roof over my head," she told me one day, while we were washing dishes. "But a house isn't a home if you feel like a ghost. Inside it? Is it, Dona Elza?" The question hung in the air, connecting our two solitudes in a way no answer could. Our bond strengthened in small gestures. One day, Anna found a box with some of my old books. She picked one, a book of poetry, and began to read aloud in the living room. Her young, clear voice filled the silence of the house, and I, sitting in my armchair, closed my eyes and just listened. No one had ever read to me. On another day, she insisted on tidying up the small garden, pulling out the weeds with an energy that was contagious. We started to smile at each other. Small, shy smiles, but they were worth more than any declaration. The house, once a mausoleum, began to come to life. The smell of cornmeal cake mixed with the smell of mold. Anna's laugh, rare and precious, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. But peace is a fragile truce. One afternoon, a tall man with a cruel look stopped in front of my gate. It was him, the stepfather. I recognized him from Anna's description. He didn't knock, just stood there, staring at the house, marking his territory. "I know she's in there. Tell that useless girl to come home," he shouted at the closed door. Anna, who was in the living room, turned pale as wax. She ran to her room and hid under the bed, trembling like on the first night. My blood ran cold. I went to the window and closed the curtain with a trembling hand, but I didn't answer. Fear, that old acquaintance, came to visit me again. But this time it was different. Now I wasn't just afraid for myself. I was afraid for her. The stepfather's threat was just the beginning. One of my neighbors, known for her sharp tongue and morbid curiosity, started asking questions. "Who is this girl, Elsa? Where did she come from?" I gave vague answers, but I knew it was a matter of time. And it was. A week later, an official car stopped in front of my house. 2 women got out, one of them with a badge from Child Protective Services. My heart stopped. They were polite, but firm. They explained that they had received an anonymous report about a minor living in a risky situation and that they needed to investigate. The word shelter was mentioned, and I saw the panic in Anna's eyes as she grabbed my arm under the table. The world I was trying to rebuild was under threat. The conversation with the social worker, a woman named Lucia, was an interrogation disguised as a friendly chat. "Do you have legal custody of Anna? What is your monthly income? Do you understand that, despite your good intentions, this is not an appropriate environment for a teenager?" Each question was a blow to my fragile confidence. I, an old woman with a meager pension and a house falling apart, what arguments did I have against the cold logic of bureaucracy? They didn't see the way Anna had started to smile again. They didn't see the rosebush in the backyard, which, against all odds, had begun to bud. They only saw poverty, irregularity, risk, and, for the first time, I felt anger, a deep anger against a blind system. I was left with an impossible choice. Lucia informed me that she would begin a formal process to locate Anna's family, or, failing that, send her to an institution. The deadline was 1 week. During that week, Anna's stepfather prowled around the house twice more, each time more aggressive. I was trapped between the threat of violence and the threat of the system. Anna spent the nights crying softly, afraid of being taken to a shelter or, worse, being forced to return to the hell she escaped from. I looked at her sleeping face, marked by dried tears. At that moment, I understood. Protecting Anna was no longer about healing my past. It was about giving her a chance to have a future. And for that, I would have to fight. I, who had spent my life running, would have to stop and face the world. I am writing Block 3. Act 3, Emotional Climax. The end of the truce came with the sound of splintering wood. It wasn't a knock, it was an assault. Anna's stepfather, tired of waiting, kicked the door with a force that made the whole house tremble. The weak latch gave way, and he burst into the room, bringing with him a whirlwind of fury and the smell of cheap liquor. His bloodshot eyes swept the room and fixed on Anna, who was next to me trying to help me fold a sheet. Her scream was a high-pitched sound of pure terror. She hid behind me, her small hands clutching the fabric of my dress with desperate strength. The man was a mountain of brutality in my small living room, his presence desecrating the sanctuary we had begun to build. My heart raced, beating against my ribs like a trapped bird, and the icy fear of my past paralyzed me for an instant. He advanced, completely ignoring my existence. His steps were heavy, determined. "You thought you could run away, you ungrateful brat?" he snarled, his voice thick with anger. "Your mother is sick with worry." The lie was so obvious it was grotesque. He stretched out his arm and grabbed Anna's wrist, pulling her from behind me with a violent jerk. "Let's go. Enough of this nonsense." Anna's cry turned into a moan of pain. "Let me go, please," she begged. The man squeezed tighter. "She's my responsibility," he shouted, looking at me for the first time with a contempt that made me shrink inside. In that second, time froze. I felt the floor disappear, the old paralysis taking over, the voice in my head screaming at me to do nothing, to just survive, as I always had. But then, I looked at Anna's face, bathed in tears and terror, and her face merged with mine from decades ago, and something broke inside me. Not my courage, but my fear. A strength I didn't know I possessed rose from the soles of my feet, shot through my fragile body, and ignited like a furnace in my chest. I moved, deliberately placing myself between him and the girl. My hand, which always trembled, was steady when I raised it, not to attack, but to block his path. My voice came out, and it was not Elsa's trembling voice. It was the voice of a matriarch, of a she-wolf defending her cub. "No," I said, the sound clear and sharp in the tense air. "She is not yours. And in this house, no one raises a hand to a child again. I've spent my whole life silent. My voice died a long time ago. But today, for her, it is born again. Get out of my house, now." The man looked at me, first with shock, then with cruel amusement. He opened his mouth to laugh, to push me, to finish what he started. But his expression changed. His eyes shifted from me for a second, fixing on the broken door. Standing in the threshold, with an equally shocked face, was Lucia, the social worker. She had arrived for her follow-up visit and found hell unleashed. Her briefcase fell from her hand, the muffled sound barely registering amidst the tension. She didn't see an elderly lady and a rebellious teenager. She saw an abuser, a terrified victim, and an unlikely protector, a 72-year-old lioness, small and bent, but with a moral authority that filled the entire room. Her professional gaze dissolved, giving way to a purely human understanding of the scene before her. The presence of an official witness was like a bucket of cold water on the stepfather's fury. His grip on Anna's arm loosened. The arrogance on his face crumbled, replaced by a cowardly panic. He pushed her towards me and backed away, stumbling over his own feet. "This isn't over," he muttered, more to himself than to us, before turning and hurrying away, disappearing through the door he himself had destroyed. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Anna's convulsive sobs as she clung to me as if I were the only solid thing in the world. And as I held her, feeling her body tremble against mine, I knew that something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the victim cowering in the corner. I was no longer the fortress of silenced pain. By defending Anna, I had finally defended myself. The voice that was born to protect her was finally my own. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now we continue with the video. With Lucia's testimony, the world that once threatened me now moved to protect us. The social worker, her eyes still marked by what she had witnessed, acted with a speed and compassion I had not thought possible. She alerted the authorities, and with her detailed report, an emergency restraining order was issued against Anna's stepfather, forbidding him from approaching us. The bureaucracy, which had once seemed an insurmountable wall, revealed it had a heart. Lucia introduced me to a young public defender, Dr. Felipe, a young man with tired eyes but with a fire of idealism that reminded me that kindness still existed. He listened to our story, not just the facts, but the pauses, the glances, the way Anna's hand never left mine. "Donna Elsa," he told me with a gentle seriousness, "we are going to fight for her custody. But for that, you will need to be very brave." The courage he asked for was the most difficult of all. To convince a judge that my home, though poor, was the safest place for Anna, I needed to open the locked chest of my soul. I needed to tell everything. My father's violence, the pregnancy resulting from abuse, the pain of having a son who replicated the cycle, and the loneliness that followed. The hearing was in a small room, which made it even more intimidating. I sat in the witness chair, my hands cold, my mouth dry. I looked at Anna sitting next to Lucia and saw in her eyes not pity, but admiration. I took a deep breath and began to speak. The words stumbled out at first, then like a flood, washing away decades of shame and silence. I cried, not from sadness, but from liberation. For the first time, my story was heard, not as a dirty secret, but as a testimony of survival. The judge's gavel did not sound like a sentence, but like the beginning of a new melody. Based on my testimony, Lucia's compelling report, and Anna's evident terror of her stepfather, temporary custody was granted to me. In that moment, the weight of 70 years seemed to evaporate from my shoulders. Anna ran into my arms, and we hugged right there, in the middle of that courtroom. A hug that sealed our fate. The journey home was different. The door, now repaired, opened to a future. The silent house came alive. Anna sang while she studied. Her laughter echoed through the rooms, and our conversations stretched into the night. We became, officially and by heart, grandmother and granddaughter by choice. The rosebush in the yard, which we cared for together, produced its first flower, a red, velvety bud, as stubborn and beautiful as our hope. My story, told with so much pain in that courtroom, did not end there. Dr. Felipe, with my permission, used our case anonymously to advocate for the importance of looking beyond appearances. Inspired by this, Lucia helped me organize a small support group in the hall of the neighborhood church. At first, 3 women came, then 5. Today, there are 12 of us. Women who, like me, carried their burdens in silence for years. There, we share, we cry, and we find strength in each other. I discovered that my purpose was not to die in silence, but to use my newfound voice so that others could also find theirs. I understood that my life was not defined by trauma, but by my ability to transform that pain into love and protection. My journey was coming to an end, but I had found peace, not in forgetting, but in redemption. Have you done a kind gesture that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love has no price," if you also believe in human kindness. 5 years have passed like a gentle river after a flood. Today, at 77, my body feels the weight of time more acutely, but my soul is lighter than ever. I spend most afternoons on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair that Anna gave me, watching the movement on the street that once terrified me. The house is the same, but it is different. The walls seem brighter, the windows wider, and there are flower pots everywhere. The silence still exists, but it is no longer a silence of absence, but of peace. It is the comfortable quiet of a home filled with love. I see Anna coming down the street. At 21, she has become a woman with an erect posture and a firm gaze. She is no longer the girl who hid inside baggy clothes. Today, she uses her intelligence as armor and her heart as a guide. A law student who carries in her briefcase not just books, but the promise of justice. She sits on the steps at my feet, as she always does, and hands me an envelope. "We won, Grandma. The first case I worked on at the public defender's office. A mother and her children get to stay in their house." Her eyes shine with a purpose that fills me with a pride that barely fits in my chest. My gaze shifts from her, for a moment, and lands on the yard. There, leaning against the wall, the rosebush that was once just a dry branch is now a large, lush bush, covered in red flowers that look like little hearts pulsating in the sun. The cycle, a cycle of pain that was broken on that stormy night, giving way to a cycle of care that flourished on that branch, in that yard, and that now, through Anna's hands and voice, will extend to other houses, to other families. I didn't just save a girl that night, I liberated an entire lineage. And in doing so, I finally found my own peace.